I'm Leslie Duvernay, California-based realtor, investor, and landlord coach, and I help homeowners buy, sell, and lease out their rental properties while avoiding some of the most common and maybe even expensive mistakes, whether they're moving up, relocating, or turning their house into a rental. Now, our team covers 3 key markets in the great state of California, the greater Sacramento region, down south in San Diego, and also our friends up in far NorCal and Shasta County. But honestly, all of the processes are basically the same across the state of California. So no matter where your property is located or where you're buying, this information will still apply across the entire state. Now, if you're thinking about selling, or maybe you're currently selling a home, this is what actually matters in 2026. Most sellers think that waiting feels safe, but waiting usually costs leverage. And when I say leverage, it basically means who has the upper hand in the deal. When your home has momentum, the buyers compete, but when your home sits, buyers negotiate harder. And that's the difference we're seeing right now. The biggest belief that I see hurting sellers over and over again is, oh, once we list it, we'll just deal with everything as it comes. On the surface, that sounds totally fine, but once you're in the deal, it actually creates a lot of stress and financial frustration that could have potentially been reduced up front. What we're seeing repeatedly is that sellers who wait to do their disclosures or upfront inspections or reports, what we're seeing repeatedly is that sellers who wait to handle their inspections, reports, disclosures, all of these details you could have done up front, they feel fine until we get into escrow, meaning we've accepted an offer on the property. Then sellers have to scramble to do disclosures. Buyers are then in charge of all of their inspections and getting all of their inspections. Issues that potentially could have been seen up front then get offloaded onto the seller all at one point in time, which leads to buyers' repair requests and repair negotiations, oftentimes an additional cost to the seller to then get their own report to get a second opinion. And then it ends up with buyer credits or even sale price reductions. This is also where things always get emotional for a seller. Now, we've seen this before. We've seen sellers who are already under contract. They're selling their home. They're going to buy another home. And we get to the point where none of these inspections, reports, or disclosures were done up front. And the buyer then comes in with a heavy ask for something that was unknown prior to them getting their offer accepted, like a roof replacement or a major plumbing issue, and then that buyer then sends in their repair request, repair negotiation, and they ask for a hefty credit or a hefty sale price reduction. Well, what we're seeing right now is a lot of times there's not enough equity in the deal to make that deal work for the seller to get to their next property. So now we're dealing with a maybe $20,000 repair. Now a seller would be facing a hefty sale price reduction or credit request, which would affect their net proceeds. And suddenly the deal you thought was solid is now at risk of falling apart. Now that stress, frustration, and anger, because every time this happens, sellers get very angry. In many cases, this could have been avoided by doing the disclosures up front, all the inspections up front, and getting all of those reports on the front end before even going active on the property. So at this point, when this doesn't get done up front, sellers are reacting under pressure, and oftentimes this transaction is tied to their next move. So you can see how there's a lot of stress in this situation. Now, here's what the process should actually look like. Now, when you list your home with our team, we do all of the heavy lifting up front. Number one, we're not going to rush to finalize a list price. So instead, we're going to do all of the disclosures up front. We'll get those inspection reports done up front and try to identify areas that we can control that would create an issue later on the front end before we even get to the point of accepting an offer. Only after we have a full picture of everything with that property, then we narrow down on the best list price with you. Because pricing a home without knowing its true condition is just guessing. Now, once we have all of these inspections and reports and everything done up front, we can strategically look at the recent comparable sales, compare that with the actual condition of the property, how it compares to the current inventory inventory that's active on the market, and then decide what price will create the most leverage for you as a seller and momentum. Now, this approach helps reduce surprises, keeps the negotiations a lot cleaner, and gives the sellers much more control in the transaction versus going into reaction mode. Now, I get the question all the time, Les, how are we going to pay for these inspections and reports? Because typically if the buyer is going to pay for them, that's, maybe $1,500 to $2,000. We don't want to pay that. The buyer needs to pay it. Well, you can certainly go with that option, but just remember that when we get to the point of reviewing all the inspections and reports, the buyers are going to send in what's called a request for repairs, asking for items to be repaired based on their inspections that they paid for, or they're going to ask for a seller credit possibly, or they're going to ask for a combination of both, or they're outright just going to cancel the deal. So you can see how frustrating that would be, not knowing what they're going to do. But if you do this all up front, then you can eliminate a lot of that stress behind not knowing. Now, obviously there are some things that come up that are outside that we can't uncover on the forefront, so we just deal with that in the transaction. But we try to prevent as much as possible on the front end so you as a seller can have more leverage when it comes to accepting an offer and working through the deal. Now, if cash is tight, that's where our concierge program actually comes in, and this is an awesome program. Almost all of our sellers utilize this program, where if you're qualified, you can borrow funds with no payment for the first 12 months. There's no hard ding on your credit. It's not going to affect the loan on your replacement purchase, and you can use this for inspections, reports, repairs, anything like that. Even simple upgrades, like if you need to repaint the house, you could use it for that. And then it just goes as a line item on the closing statement. You pay it off at closing, but in the meantime, you don't have any payments for the first 12 months. A good example of using the concierge program would be, let's say you inherited a property from a family member and that family member passed away. You're now the executor of the estate, and the person who passed away had a lot of personal belongings, a lot of junk, a lot of trash. Maybe they were a hoarder, who knows? So you don't really want to spend your own money. You want to work it into the deal. That's where concierge would come in. You could borrow the money and have it be a line item on the closing statement, and you could hire a junk removal company and a cleaner, and you could pay for that out of the concierge funds. That way you're not having to fork over the cash because you just had this property fall in your lap and now you have to deal with it. The next thing I want to cover is that pricing and presentation still definitely matter in 2026. This is the second place where sellers actually lose a lot of leverage, because right now inventory is high in a lot of the markets that we work, and buyers have options. Buyers do all of their searching online now, so if your property does not stop the scroll, then they're just going to skip right over it and never even book a showing. Pricing above the market almost always backfires. So pricing your home strategically to create leverage and momentum is going to give you as a seller the upper hand in the transaction. And remember, creating that momentum creates leverage. If your home sits, that just gives more leverage to the buyer, because the buyer is now thinking, well, what's wrong with this place, or it's overpriced. They won't even come in to take a look at the property half the time. So as a seller, it just weakens your negotiating power. And on the presentation side, this actually matters more than a lot of sellers think. And I'll give you an example. A property that we recently showed a few months ago, actually, we showed up for the showing with buyers, and the sellers had recently literally dropped off a massive load in the toilet. The whole house smelled like crap. It was a horrible experience for the buyer. The buyer was like in and out, didn't even want to look at the house. So homes that are clean, tidy, and smell good, those win. And with more inventory being on the market and buyers being so picky these days, if someone walks into a house and has this overwhelming smell that completely turns them off, then they are just going to cross that home off. Or if it appears really dirty or unorganized or just not well taken care of, that is also going to create a red flag for the buyer. Oh, well, if they treat their house like this for showings, then there's probably a lot of deferred maintenance. You can see how that could spiral in a buyer's eyes, especially if they have 20 other houses that they've looked at that same day. So I tell people this all the time: your Glade plug-in will not mask your your litter box smell. Good presentation signals care, and care in turn affects price, terms, and how hard a buyer may push to negotiate. Now, the last thing I want to touch on is a quick mindset shift on commissions. There's been a lot of talk about commissions and this and that and NAR and blah, blah, blah. Yes, commissions do show on the seller side of the statement, but the buyer actually funds the deal through their successful closing. So until the transaction actually closes, those numbers are just numbers on a piece of paper. What actually matters is the net result once the deal actually closes. So while you may think you are paying the commissions in the deal, you're actually not. It's just on your side of the statement. The buyer is the one who funds the deal at that sale price and then successfully closes the transaction and funds the deal with their loan or cash or however. It just goes on your statement. So the net number is the most important number, which is what you're going to take home after everything. So for sellers who really want to win in 2026, these are the sellers who front load their disclosures, inspections, and reports, price their home competitively to create momentum from day one, present their homes well, and understand how leverage actually works. Now, if you're watching this on my YouTube channel, comment sell and tell me what city you're in. And if you got this via our email newsletter, reply and we can send you our seller guide or do a quick value check. And for our lovely past clients, if you ever want a quick value check or have something you want to run through scenario wise, reach out anytime. There's obviously no pressure, no obligation. Happy to help anytime, and I hope you have a great day.